My name's Paul Arthur and my co-convener is Tully Barnett, who's Associate Director of the Australasian Consortium of Humanities Research Centres. Today's meeting is being held in the country of the Darug people of the Darug Nation. I acknowledge their ancestors who have been the traditional owners of their country for thousands of years. I also acknowledge and pay respect to the Darug people's elders past and present and Indigenous people in this room. On the program we have 20 speakers from 10 countries. What a remarkable lineup. This is a rare opportunity for global dialogue around the future of the humanities and the influence of technology on our evolving disciplines. I'm so pleased that these speakers have agreed to participate and you, the audience, has come to share in this dialogue. This event is sponsored by the Australasian Consortium of Humanities Research Centres with the support of the Australian Academy of the Humanities, the Council for Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences, CentreNet, the International Digital Humanities Training Network and the UWS Digital Humanities Research Group. I'd particularly like to thank my co-convener Tully Barnett for her work in organising this program. And now I'd like to invite Peter Hutchings, Dean of Humanities and Communication Arts at University of Western Sydney, to say some words of welcome too.
Thanks, Paul. Welcome to UWS Parramatta, for those of you who've not been here before, and welcome to this conference. I'd also like to join Paul in acknowledging the Darug people, the custodians of the land on which we're meeting. One of the things about humanities at University of Western Sydney is that we're very cross-disciplinary, and the kinds of cross-disciplinary global dialogues that are the focus of this important public event are really central to the way we go about doing things here. I'd also like to join Paul in acknowledging the representatives of the people who've made this event possible: the Australian Consortium of Humanities Research Centres, the Australian Academy of the Humanities, the Council for Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences, and also to acknowledge Professor Schwartz's presence here today, and the Alliance of Digital Humanities Organisations, as well as all of the attendees. I'm looking forward to a very stimulating couple of days. I'll be dropping in and out, unfortunately, but you'll get the benefit of being here all the time, and I hope you enjoy the conference and enjoy being in Sydney. We've managed to organise some reasonably good weather for the week. So thank you very much for coming here, and have a great conference.
Thanks very much, Peter. In the first half, we have a number of speakers, and the first up is, in fact, Robert Fidian, speaking about the activities of the Australasian Consortium of Humanities Research Centres and other things. Here's Robert.
Thanks, Paul. And welcome all. And yes, Sydney's lovely in winter. It's summer that it's horrible. And it's a deal warmer than back home in Adelaide when we left at 5-ish this morning. Okay, the Australasian Consortium of Humanities Research Centres. I think it was in 2008 that Ian McCorman called a meeting of research centre directors at the University of Sydney, and we sat around the table and talked and found we had a lot in common. And at the end of the day, Ian McCorman said, and I think it'd be really good if we had a consortium like the International Consortium of Humanities Research Centres, and he said, I'm not going to run it. And so we all inspected the polish on our shoes, avoided eye contact for a while and went home at the end of that process. And I talked to my dean and my executive dean because it occurred to me that this was a very good idea and it would be a very useful thing for my university, Flinders University in Adelaide, to be involved with. And for reasons that still remain obscure to me, they agreed with me. And so we've been running since 2011. We run sharp and lively annual events. We're developing interest groups, for example, for regional humanities and with collecting institutions. We're developing a focus on public humanities. And we will meet again, and we will meet in November at Massey University in Auckland. So we are a little bit international, Australia and New Zealand, and aim to work out into Southeast Asia, as long as there are legitimate ways of doing it. The thing about research centres in our part of the world, it's not quite the North American model where you have large funded organisations. Some of them are reasonably large and some of them are reasonably funded. But there are also organisations which I like to describe as 2 or 3 people huddled around a piece of plastic on a door, more or less the idea of a group. And so it's sort of any form of conglomeration. What I like to think we're doing there is talking to the living in the sector. to the people where if you go with an idea, you won't... Some humanities scholars, we've all met them, will give you 13 elaborate reasons why we can't do anything just yet about these, and possibly the feedback effects would be disastrous. You talk to humanities centre directors and actually you come up with solutions, ways of getting things done. It's so much more interesting, and that, I think, is the dynamic space of a research centre. That's why we have centres on top of schools and disciplines, where they can be more problem-driven, that can be more interdisciplinary and collaboratory, because we don't in the humanities traditionally have ways of gathering together and building concentrations of expertise. We focus particularly on research, and so we fit in amongst the other organisations like the Academy and CHAS, we're focusing particularly on the humanities and particularly on research, and that has been a very valuable thing for us, to get together to share knowledge about how to do things, to get our act together in terms of various debates, discussions nationally, to start to explain more widely what we're good at and what we want to support it. And in a sense, we've learnt from the rapid development of digital humanities. Digital humanities, at least often, has more reason to huddle around a sort of a set of infrastructure, which is really the way the STEM subjects work together. And we need to get those forms of solidarity and interdisciplinarity going better in our area. So that's what we're particularly interested in. We're connected with the wider world through the Consortium of Humanities Centres and Institutes. We have a wonderful national and international board. Paul's an example of how wonderful it is, but is there anyone else in the room not on the board at present? And Tully is actually the brains of the outfit, and will probably be telling me I've talked too long already. Obvious crossover points between digital humanities and centres. As I've already said, digital humanities tends to happen in groups, and whereas a classic example of a humanities scholar is the Lone Ranger, digital humanities is developing centres of its own. But I think secondly, the most innovative work happens there and will inevitably be inflected by the developments in digital humanities. And here's, I guess, my question, my provocation. Many core activities of the humanities remain analogue. In English, my home discipline, Moretti's distant reading will find new things, will tell us things that are interesting, but it will not replace close reading. Close reading is something that I think is hardwired into what we do. In history, for example, archives can and should be digitised, but must also be experienced. There is a dialogue, I think, between the digital and the physical elements of humanities, and many humanities scholars are happiest sitting in a chair reading a book. That's the spot in my house with the northern sun. And what I don't want to have happen is what, in some sense, happened during the theory wars of the 90s, 80s, 90s and noughties. We've had too many imperial plans in the theory years. My sense is that digital humanities is being most transformative where it's most collaborative with analogue humanities. And this, of course, is happening. Can we please have a revolution, the revolution underway, that is an amplification of possibilities rather than a battle for dominance? I want amplification of possibilities rather than one thing taking over another. And that'll do me.
Thanks, Robert. And to speak next is Christina Parolin, who's the Executive Director of the Australian Academy of the Humanities. And I'd just like to note in this company the very strong support that the Academy of the Humanities has shown for digital humanities, but especially in the establishment of the Australasian Association for Digital Humanities.
Thank you, Paul. I also wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet, the Darug people of the Darug Nation, and pay my respect to their elders past and present. Now, I heard a radio program during the week about how women apologise too much. We say sorry too much, but I do actually have to start with an apology, and that apology is for my voice. which I thought was on the way back, but since arriving in Sydney, it's on the way out again. So I'm sorry, and I am very pleased that you only have to listen to that scratchy noise for about 5 minutes. The Academy is one of 4 learned academies in Australia, along with the Academies of Science, Technological Sciences and Engineering, and the Academy of Social Sciences. And we were established in 1969 and serve as an advisory and an advocacy organisation providing independent advice to government. So we have a long history of engagement with government policy processes on issues affecting the humanities community. And thank you, Paul. The Academy is very proud to have been associated with the establishment of the Australasian Association of Digital Humanities back in 2011, when we facilitated some conversations that led to the formation of the association. And that's really where we see our role, doing just that sort of thing for the humanities community, facilitating the conversations that help grow and connect our researchers across Australia but also internationally. And those conversations in turn help our role, our policy work enormously, and with our dialogues with government. So one area in which we're, again, particularly active involves national discussions around research infrastructure, and many of you in this room are very familiar with the poor track record in investment in terms of delivering research infrastructure for the humanities disciplines in Australia. And the scale of funding really resembles more the crumbs than any of the big bickies or the traditional cookies and other of the edible kind, cookies, I have to remember to say that in a digital humanities setting. And some of you may know that our government has commissioned several reviews into research infrastructure as the funding program, current funding program, hobbles along with no long-term commitment. So the conversations that the Academy is currently facilitating in that space are focusing more on the future than on the past. We need to know what the humanities community need in terms of research infrastructure and what that will help enable. So we're currently focusing on developing a strategy for humanities research infrastructure, and we're bringing together policymakers, researchers and our cultural and collecting institutions to start thinking about what a strategy might look like. We see the cultural and collecting institutions as absolutely integral to any strategy here, because they are the repositories of the cultural data of the nation. And so even though these conversations have only just begun, there's some key components are starting to already emerge, and I'll just list a couple of them. That we need a solid argument for the value of humanities research infrastructure to the national interest. That's fundamental for attracting investment. That sustainability needs to be a central tenet of the strategy. That we'll need to think about a national digitisation strategy, and this will require identifying priorities for investment. That skills development and training will be a core element for consideration. That diversity of scale is important, that we need to start thinking about large-scale infrastructure, but also the needs of individual researchers. And a strategy will also need to consider how to leverage our investment in support of international collaborations and access to international infrastructure. It's very early days, but we're very keen to listen over the next few days and hear from the digital humanities community about their infrastructure needs and how such investments will help build that community, but also the broader humanities community. And we very much welcome your input as we begin to draft that strategy. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
I'm really pleased to welcome Stephen Schwartz, who's the Executive Director of the Council for Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences.
Thanks very much for that introduction. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today and to talk with you about digital humanities. As you heard, I'm the Chief Executive of the Council for the Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences. It's a peak body. We have about 8 umbrella organisations. We have about 80 organisational members who in turn have about 50,000 members of their own. And it covers not only academic humanities and social sciences, but also practitioner groups, performers, artists, museums, libraries, and so on. And our job is advocacy. But what I really wanted to tell you in my 5 minutes that I have to tell you about is an experience of mine that goes back quite a long time. When I was young, my family lived in New York City, and to make some extra money after school, I had a job at the New York Public Library, and every day I would ride the subway to 42nd Street. And then I'd get out and I'd walk rather quickly past all of the X-rated movie theaters that lined the streets in those days showing pornography. I'd go into the library, I'd give a nod to the two big stone lions. In those days, the library saw its job primarily as the preservation of knowledge rather than the creation of knowledge or the dissemination of knowledge. So it was a research library, and you could only really use it if you were an approved scholar, and approval wasn't given lightly. So they really saw themselves as a protection organization to protect what they had. Anyway, fast forward rather more decades than I'd like to think about to the present. And lots of things have changed. So subway still stops at 42nd Street, but the porno palaces, they're all gone. Maybe one of the first industries to be disrupted by the digital revolution. Walk over to the library and things look the same. Patience and fortitude are still patient and still waiting for you. But the library's changed as well beneath the surface. It's found a new mission. And to a great extent, that has to do with the digital revolution as well. Their mission has changed from, as I said, conservation and preservation of knowledge, quite dramatically to the creation of knowledge and to making it available to everyone it can. And I wanted to give you an example. The library has been collecting menus. For years and years, they've been collecting menus from around the world in different places. So, for example, in 1900, the mayor of Adelaide, here in South Australia, gave a lunch to farewell the South Australian troops who were going off to South Africa to fight in the Boer War. Do you want to know what he served? It's not a problem. The library has the menu. Here's a hint. 3 different kinds of meat are on the menu. If you want to know what was served at Buckingham Palace for the Derby Day lunch in 1906, the library has that menu as well. 40,000 plus menus in the collection. The only problem is they're not much used. So people would want to use them. Social historians would be interested. Foodies, cooks, chefs would be interested. Novelists, movie producers. Lots of people would want to. But you had to actually go through each one by hand because the calligraphy and the one-off designs of these menus meant that you couldn't digitize them using optical scanning technology because it wouldn't work. So the library decided to do something called networking. And they took as their lead the Worldwide Telescope. Do you all know about the Worldwide Telescope? Where essentially amateurs around the world are given a patch of sky to observe, and the data are fed into one giant place at Oxford. Well, the library had a similar idea. Let's get people around the world, let's get a network of people around the world to adopt menus and then type them in manually, transcribe them in so that we will then have them digitized in the old-fashioned way. So the network was formed, the menus are digitized, and now they are a living resource on the web. You type the word cockles into, it's called What's on the Menu, by the way, the website. If you type the word cockles in, you'll find out where it was served, when it was served, how it was served, how it was prepared, what else it went with. But more than that, because it's linked to Flickr, it's linked to YouTube, and it's linked to Pinterest, you'll get pictures, you'll get photos, you'll get videos, you'll get cooking lessons. In fact, you'll know which characters in literature, Robert's period, ate them, when they ate them, you'll know which movies they're doing. All of this, of course, is available because of the digitization of those menus, and now it's being used. So movie producers and writers are using it to add veracity to their productions. Economists are using it to look at the social history of food. Did you know that there were times in history when lobster was considered food for poor people? and only they can eat it, you know. And so these sorts of trends are now available, and people can study them because of digitization. Now, at one level, you might say, well, all the library has actually done, well, not all, what the library has actually done is simply use digitization to make better use of their collection. But actually, I think they've done more than that. In a way, they've created a whole new area of knowledge, a whole new area of scholarly work and research with practical aspects to it as well. And this is kind of a natural progression. When automobiles were first being sold, they were called horseless carriages. They were defined in relation to the past. And I think to some extent, digital humanities is at that level now. It's being defined in relation to something called the humanities. And that we'll know that digital humanities have really arrived when you don't need the digital anymore, and there will just be the humanities. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Our next speaker is someone who's very well known indeed in the field of digital humanities, a pioneer and a founding figure in the field, Willard McCarty. And Willard's going to speak, among other things, about the humanist electronic seminar that he's run for, well, a number of decades now, which is one of the main avenues for dissemination of information and for debate about this changing field. Please welcome Willard.
Thank you. Humanist was created on the 7th of May in 1987 as a result of a meeting of young Turks in South Carolina. I was one of them, who were determined to push over the walls of the academy that were keeping us from having the kind of employment that we wanted. At the time, computing was poison in its career. 30 years later, well, it will be next year, Humanist has 2,751 members. It has grown steadily every year since it was created. It is an open forum of the widest possible scope. There's no delimitation of subject matter of any kind. And it is not structurally dominated by one individual as a blog is usually. It's an open mailman listserv kind of thing. It allows and has frequently entertained long critical discussions on all manner of subjects. It's moderated by me. Sometimes, in fact, more often than I would like, its discussions are provoked by me, by saying something outrageous, because you have to believe. I've learned only to have to believe anything I say, and this seems to be very useful as far as humans are concerned. Essential to it is that it constantly appears, because anything online has to be there or it ceases to exist in the memory very, very quickly. So I keep it going, and that commitment is, I think, essential to it. But the long discussions, which it was created to spark, is supported by information interchange of all manner of things. Jobs, more recently, lots of jobs turned up. Events of all kinds and so forth. Most of the people are what we call in the trade lurkers. They don't contribute, they just listen. They just read the messages. But I know anecdotally from a fair bit of volunteer testimony that these people regard it as quite valuable. And the fact that it has kept on growing despite the number of ways in which people can communicate, I think suggests that it is serving a useful function. For me, the function it serves is my research. If I have half an idea, I put it out instead of publishing it. I put it out on Humanists to see what people think. And often I get interesting reactions that actually shape the research that I do. The members are from everywhere. That is, across all the disciplines of the arts, humanities, and sciences, and the fellow travelers outside academia who just take an interest. Width and generosity of scope, which was not in the original design, I need to emphasize. It was what the thing became. As novelists often say about the plots of their novel, the characters in their novel, once created, the characters take on lives of their own. And Humanists quickly took on a life of its own. Censorship is very rare. Absolute censorship is very rare. I can't remember the last time it happened. However, sometimes I give contributors very strong advice about how to rephrase their message before I think it should go out. There was one recently about somebody who was soliciting monetary contributions to a good cause. And I suggested there were ways of doing this that did not involve a link to donate money. One of the motivating factors in this, not trivial, but it sounds trivial, was attention to the smallest details of formatting, spelling, and punctuation. I am, in effect, a copy editor, and that function has been constant. I can remember when, before Humanists got going, exchange of information among people like us was done very haphazardly by just putting anything online that you got and not formatting it properly or anything of that sort at all, because information was so scarce. And I swore that Humanists would not be like that. So I'm a permanent copy editor. And that's fine, because the care in how it appears and how the language appears on Humanist is a sign of the care of thought that goes into it, or suggests the care of thought that should go into it. So that's Humanist. If you're interested, just Google for it, you'll find it. Thank you.
Now, I'd like to invite our next speaker, Geoffrey Rockwell, to talk. Our university has been part of a wonderful initiative that Geoffrey organises with others, the Around the World Symposium, which is well, I won't give it away. I'll let you talk about it. And the theme of building humanities and networks in the communities, it's in the humanities rather, it's a fantastic example of community building.
I direct a center called the Cool Institute for Advanced Study. Its mission, the short version of its mission, is a statement from our founding president, the founding president of the University of Alberta, who said that the purpose of the university was the uplifting of the whole people. So it's an institute that in many ways is a research institute, but is one that reaches out to the community and has this built in. It also has the advantage, since it's called the Cool Institute, that I can call myself the director of Cool. And everyone we fund is a cool scholar, and you can imagine how we play on this. My wife gave me a button maker for Christmas 2 years ago, and so we have a lot of fun. I want to talk about 3 projects we've done, because we've tried to run this institute very differently from other endowed institutes, which often take a fellow model of bringing very important people who have plenty of money in. We've taken a slightly different approach. I'm going to talk about 3 things. The first thing was we don't know who we are. We support the social sciences, arts, and humanities at the University of Alberta and beyond. And that is spread over 10 different faculties, including a Francophone campus and something like that. Nobody knows what are the really interesting areas of interdisciplinary research that cross these faculties. Chairs know what's happening in their department, deans know what's happening in their faculty, but no one sees the big picture. And of course, the obvious answer for that is to start another database that everybody fills in. No, that's not going to happen. The other obvious answer is to be able to cull all of the annual reports. No, freedom of information, our faculty are not going to go with that. We actually we scraped all the websites, and we used digital humanities techniques, so we sort of basically social network analysis to build something which allows people to explore the intersections. I went in, typed in Australia. I saw all the people that have the keyword Australia somewhere on their web pages. It also allows us to mirror things back to our colleagues, saying this is what you look like on the internet. Because one of the things that's becoming clear to everybody is that the way you present on the internet is one of the ways people are going to find you. Research collaborators, potential graduate students. And many of my colleagues really don't care and don't understand how they present or don't present. And when you show them a keyword cloud in which they have one word, can't, then they realize, oh my God, that was 10 years ago when I used to do something with, thanks a lot. This is the environment. There's Australia and the people doing Australia. Then I double clicked on one person, Ian McLaren. It opens his keywords and you can wander your way around. So this is one sort of activity in the sort of spirit of know thyself. This is what the sort of keywords that we return to people are, 2 colleagues from philosophy. The second initiative that we're doing So that's sort of mapping who we are. But one of the things that became clear to us is we don't know what research interests our community has. What does the city want in the way of research? What does the region want? What does the province of Alberta or Canada want? We simply do not have good mechanisms for listening. So we're now following up with a process to start mapping the way research is described in the community so that we can start connecting the researchers in the academy to those outside. And I give as an example here, the mayor of Edmonton has started a task force on poverty. He wants to end poverty in Edmonton in a generation. Nowhere does he use the word research, but when you read the documentation over and over again, you see that they are seeking solutions. And that we have colleagues in the social sciences and humanities that are looking at all of the issues that he considers interesting. So what we're trying to do is to figure out how to listen and to map the community needs. And to give an example of a project we're already addressing, we've started a process of funding rapid research responses. When the Euromaidan exploded in Ukraine, we have one of the largest concentrations of scholars studying Ukrainian history, languages, and politics for reasons that have to do with immigration to Alberta. We challenged a bunch of Ukrainian scholars to come together and to develop a public-facing online forum in which their research was adapted. We videotaped them, we got them talking about what they would recommend people read, we got them writing short blog posts, and we turned this around in about a month. I know that seems like a long time, but if you've ever worked with colleagues in the humanities, a month is like lightning speed. And all of you, those of you who work in the digital humanities, you can imagine how we did it. We threw up WordPress, we hired a really smart digital humanities student, we got somebody who was a Ukrainian Canadian, and they just started knocking on doors, and this website has now morphed into a more permanent research thing. And it involved, by the way, colleagues in Ukraine also. So this idea of rapid research response, seeing that there's a community need and responding to it quickly is the second initiative. The third one, which is the one that Paul introduced, is our attempt to reach out internationally. And it's a conference that we've run 3 times now. It's called the Around the World Conference. Each year it is run, we partner with all sorts of organizations, including GoDH, and of course the University of Western Sydney, I think, is essentially a founding anchor partner. And the idea of this is to have an online conference on a topic in which the panels or individuals who speak, their video is streamed to us and then streamed back out over the internet. And we usually go for about 12 hours. The first year we went 18, and that just about killed us. And it's on a particular topic. And I'll mention that this year the topic was big data. We actually had 45 speakers from 12 countries, close to 1,000 viewers from 39 countries over the day. The video then gets edited and archived, so you have a sort of long tail of future people viewing this. This is Harold Short there, getting ready to present. This is from the archive of last year's one. The thing that allows us to do, it's not particularly innovative to do online conferences, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to find a way to connect to countries and colleagues that would never make it to a conference like this, to be truly global. So for example, we had a panel from Ekiti State University in Ado-Ekiti, Nigeria. Everybody talked about Google and digitization, the internet, but only 3 of the Nigerian languages are in any sense digitized and available to be found on the internet. And the vast majority of oral histories and stories and literatures in Nigeria just do not show up at all. These types of voices we don't hear in our normal conferences. And this idea of an around-the-world conference allows us to start connecting and bringing these voices into dialogue with us. Finally, this being Alberta, and I don't know how much you guys know about Alberta, but Alberta emits more greenhouse gases than probably all the rest of Canada combined due to the enormous, we call them oil sands, other less charitable people call them tar sands. It is a province that for many years has not been thinking about sustainable lifestyles. We've just got a new socialist government, and so we are listening to them and they are listening to us. But we as researchers are beginning to think about how do we do sustainable research. What is the electricity consumption of the servers we're using? How can we begin to reduce that? What is the cost of flying all over the place for conferences, and how can we reduce that? And the Around the World conference is one way of trying to model alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. That's fantastic. Now we have one more speaker before we open for some discussion, and that speaker is Alex Gill. Alex is a really important person in the world of global digital humanities, which is the special interest group. It was the first established special interest group of the Alliance of Digital Humanities Organisations, and is incredibly vibrant and active in building communities and making connections across the world, across languages and cultures.
So GoDH started 2013 as a special interest group of the Alliance for Digital Humanities organization. It's the first special interest group. We formed, our purpose is to help break down barriers of communication between researchers around the world, become visible to one another in each continent of the planet. Now, one of the things that we were noticing is that it was becoming difficult to find out what was going on in South America and Africa and East Asia about 3 or 4 years ago. But we had a hunch that probably a lot of activity in digital humanities by another name was taking place in those places. So our group sought to go out there and make friends. And not make friends in a spirit of expertise, seeking the natives to educate them, but rather as peers seeking peers, so that we could mutually learn from one another. Now, we had the same experience that the folks in the Comintern had during the Soviet Union when they went out there looking to spread the gospel of communism, and then they found out that, oh my God, there are communists out there, they just don't call it that. We've had a similar experience. Now, we've been very active. It's a group of volunteers. They come from all over the world. We have an executive. Our main vehicle of communication is a mailing list. Somebody's probably tweeting out there the link to join, if you want to join our mailing list. This is our website. Now, the way that we operate is we organize working groups. So we like to do this kind of work of getting to know each other around the world and making friends through working groups, through projects. Now, we've had several already. Some have already been archived, and some are still going, and we got some new ones, and I'll be talking a little bit about that today. Some of our working groups were meant to organize DAC camps. I don't know if everybody's familiar with the DAC camp, the Technology and Humanities Camp. We organized one in Cuba, we organized one in Beirut. We ran a global Wikipedia-thon, I think they're called now, Wiki Write-a-thon, for women of color around the world. We have a Translation Commons group that has been very active since the beginning and helped organize last year at Lausanne the DH Whisperer program, which was an attempt at making sure that we can translate each other in other languages so that English starts becoming unhinged as the dominant lingua franca in our conferences. This year, we have two really exciting new offerings. We are putting together a translation toolkit, which we are hoping to spread around the global community. A set of tools that people can use at conferences and for papers in order to help translate each other, make it easy to tap into the crowds to translate each other. The director of that group is Elika Ortega. We have another really exciting group called the Minimal Computing Group, which is brand new too. This conversation started last year in Lausanne. That group is interested in figuring out what are all the different technological environments out there. Under what conditions does digital humanities happen around the world? Not necessarily connected to the internet, for example. What happens when you try to do digital humanities with low bandwidth or with poor hardware or under dictatorship or censorship? So these are some of the environments we see out there, and we see people passing USVs and doing all kinds of interesting things, and that work is happening. So the Minimal Computing Group is interested in these conversations with members from all around the world. With that little background, I wanted to show you a little bit of the state of digital humanities around the world as we see it from the vantage point of GoDH. Now, this was one of our working groups, the Around the Age in 80 Days working group. We went around the world for 80 days last summer, and every day we highlighted one project around the world. I see some of the editors here in the room. We have many editors. We worked from a list of 250 projects, master list of 250 projects that we crowdsourced on Twitter and Facebook and put it on a Google Docs spreadsheet, and then the editors picked 80. Every day we released a new project. The point of this exercise was to show that digital humanities was happening everywhere around the world. Now, there had been a map that had been circulating before this one that mapped all the centers around the world, done by Melissa Terrace. Now, that one showed a lot of empty spots in Africa, Asia, etc. We wanted to show that digital humanities was indeed present in all these places, and all you had to do was actually focus on projects rather than centers. Now, a couple of days ago, I put together another map. I put this together a couple of days ago to get a sense now, not of the projects, not of the centers, but of the organizations, so that we can get a good sense of now how the world is really starting to organize. It's not only that little rogue projects are popping up here and there, but actually professional organizations are popping up everywhere. So the dark boundaries represent the organizations that belong to ADHO. So we have here in this big dark boundary, we have the European Association for Digital Humanities. We have the Association for Computers and the Humanities, the Canadian ones. Here on this side, if we drag it here, here's where we are right now, the Australasian Association for Digital Humanities. There's the Japanese Association for Digital Humanities, and I see some other representatives here as well. So this is the Alliance for Digital Humanities organization. CenterNet is not in this map. Of course, they have their own map, and they also belong to ADHO. Outside of these dark, bold boundaries, you see all the other world organizations that are starting to form that do not belong yet. I think the pink one there you see is Humanistica, which is a new one, the Francophone one that now just applied for constituent organization membership status within ADHO. I invite you to, I think somebody will probably tweeting this at this time, I hope, to explore this. In gray, you will see organizations in gestation. They still have not been instituted, but they are forming. There is 3 of them. In South Africa, a new one is being talked about. That one is probably going to come out in a week or so. The Arab world is forming also. And the person leading that charge is here at this conference, David Risley. I encourage you to talk to him if you're interested in that one. And Taiwan is forming its organization. I'm showing this because obviously the pattern is clear. This was not our world 3 or 4 years ago. In 5 or 6 years ago, we'll probably see a lot more colors on this map. What we're doing here is we're building basically a global digital, a new republic of letters of global scope. This presents new opportunities for us. A scary challenge because at no particular point in history were we ever this networked, so that we could actually speak of a global humanities that we all can participate in. Now, just to close, I wanted to complicate a little bit this concept of the global, because since we do a lot of this global, I don't want you to think that there is some kind of unitarian vision of what the digital humanities can be. On the contrary, the main experience, the main lesson we've learned from our work at GoDH is that what we're basically talking about here is the Library of Babylon. There is no one digital humanities out there. It is more like your DH is not my DH is not your DH, to quote my colleague Mary, and that is a good thing. So in this new world of the humanities that we're building, we will not necessarily understand each other. We have different histories, different relationships to the history of colonialism. Just the same way that the humanities itself is not the same around the world, the digital humanities will not be the same. But that is a good thing. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alex. And I should mention, and maybe you can add it to the map, that the Korean Association for Digital Humanities was established last month, and we'll be hearing from some people involved in that in the second half of this session, which is fantastic, another sign of activity in this part of the world. Would anybody like to get off with a question from the audience? I know you've got one there.
So my question is, what exactly is the digital humanities from your organization? How sciencey can we be? How technical can we be? At what point are we no longer humanities or no longer digital?
A lot of these things that we've mapped here, and when we did the projects one, these folks were not calling themselves digital humans. Many of them had not heard of the term. You have to understand that these humanities makes sense in English. In Spanish, it doesn't make any sense. We use letters and arts and letters. Letras we have here in some of the other Romance languages now. In Arabic, it's completely different. So this is the same challenge that we have in defining the humanities. And not everywhere in the world is this distinction between science and the humanities. The Europeans tend to consider their humanities more scientific already in my estimate, than we do in North America. You're going to find these differences everywhere. All of these concepts have epistemologies, and those epistemologies are local. They belong to local histories, even if there are global designs here, to quote Walter Mignon. The ideal here would be just simply to listen and learn from the ways that folks do the humanities around the world, according to whatever terms they use, and find excuses to get together in order to share this without being too strict about what we mean by that. The worst thing we can do probably is come up with some universal definition of these things, that like if you don't fall under that criteria, then you can't hang out. That seems to be rear guard to me. And my mother-in-law says, I really don't know what he does, but it pays the bills.
The other thing I'd quickly add to that is that I don't think many people who think of themselves as humanists. Not primarily. Even in the Anglophone world. It's a category that it's a sort of super category above people's real disciplinary identification as some sort of a scholar or another, and so I think that's another reason for not worrying too much. It's an interesting question and it's something we should wonder about, but it's not something we should bicker about.
I would substitute become for be. How sciencey can we be? We often talk about disciplines as if they were things. The Oxford English Dictionary etymology of discipline interestingly suggests that discipline is what people do. And what people do changes and is changing quite rapidly. So it's a question of what we find useful. And that is in flux all the time. Of course, you have to be definite at the administrative level. Then you hire somebody or you submit some publication. But behind that is an adventurousness which we need to nurture as much as we possibly can, to experiment, try things out, see what works.
Robert, the point you finished with was interesting, that you didn't elaborate on. It was a call for amplification instead of dominance. Can you amplify on that one?
I hope so. Thanks, Craig. The problem, and it seems to me particularly often the case in the Australian academic circumstance, the Australian academic situation, is that you have something new come in and it wipes out what's gone before and it replaces itself. And because we're a reasonably large, we're a reasonably large area, a reasonably large university system, it's sort of worth fighting for. But we're not big enough to have the. We're small enough that something can almost entirely take over. So, and almost entirely leave aside literary tradition can be taken over by an almost entirely deconstructive tradition over a series of years. And those sorts of culture wars, which I think have done the humanities in a broad sense an awful lot of harm. I don't want to see that sort of history repeated. There's no reason why it should, but I just want to bell that particular cat. The digital humanities brings many new possibilities, but I desperately hope that they're more dialogical than some of the previous changes of the guard that I've experienced in the 2.5, 3 decades I've been around.
I want to say something about this because I think, when the digital humanities or humanities computing was small and feebly passes. There are no stakes. I think we're beginning to see where some of the fault lines and bitterness and anger are emerging, or where some of the crimes might emerge. There was a panel, there's been a loose group of people organized around the dark side of DH, and I think we would do well to listen, not always agree, but to listen to people who are saying, no, what you're doing is not inclusive, dialogical, or not in the tradition of humanities, or just straight out stupid. That's not quite the right term, but neither digital nor humane or something like that. So we've seen some Twitter wars break out. I know some people have been savagely attacked on Twitter. So fracture lines are beginning to open up, and we all have to try to maintain a level of respectful discourse.
It's going to be a bit difficult because of the moment we're in right now. Because I think because of the policies of Big Tent and the growth and the Eternal September, in places with large populations of digital humanists, we have a new kind of digital humanist, which is the one that wants to identify as a digital humanist, but is more interested in really just critiquing it as the form of operation, right? It says, I am a digital humanist, but I'm not really going to do text analysis or any of these things. I'm just going to critique it, and I'm going to get professional rewards for that. I personally think we perhaps should guard ourselves a little bit because what Derrida used to call the autoimmune problem with democracies, that democracies accept their own destruction by being democratic. But maybe I'm wrong. We can talk about it.
But when we design curriculum, we are saying what we think. That makes it hard to be so loose and open. And to think about, I think it's important to think about what we want to be at the core of it, what kind of experience, what kind of knowledge at the core of it. I mean, my particular argument that is that there has to be some confrontation directly with something like programming or text encoding or anything which causes you to come up against the hard fact of binary decision making. That would be my core from which to start, is that experience. And anyone who critiques the digital humanities, who doesn't have that, has to be really very, very bright.
My name is Hassan from the American University student. I was just wondering, how would we sell DH to other students, students that would have no prior knowledge to DH? What are some ideas or techniques?
So I used to have to go to the Ontario University Council to recruitment fairs to try to recruit students. And one of the interesting things is you're often trying to recruit them and their parents at the same time. And you can't say the same thing about, but one of the first things, and this builds on what was said before, is that prospective students have no idea what the humanities are. That's an administrative term. It's an internal to the university. So I have to say, when we developed an undergraduate program, we did not call it humanities. We called it multimedia. And then when people said, well, what am I going to do? Well, you're going to learn to communicate with multimedia. You're going to learn to critique it. You're going to learn to understand it and read it. It was much easier to explain what this was. This is in the 90s. Than trying to call it digital humanities. We're doing a lot of digital humanities, but in terms of explaining it to students, we tactically decided not to call it that. It also allowed us to be more inclusive of the arts and game studies and a bunch of fields that haven't felt comfortable under the Big Tent.
I think it's important to point out also that most places where you look, the digital humanities is a sort of hybrid practice that at the intersection of libraries and departments. So that makes it kind of a slightly little different than teaching as part of the curriculum, only thinking about it as part of the faculty of arts. Not every school has an MLS degree out there, but when you start practicing digital humanities, you start teaching it, you are introducing students to librarianship in one way or another. Most of the activities we do under the name of this banner are sort of geared towards building a new republic of letter, the stewardship of which belongs in the library. And most of the digital archives and digital exhibits out there are attached to libraries or have library labor. Engineers working within the library, completely detached from faculty. So something to consider.
You spoke of ESR's jargon at the end of the eternal September. How do you find the culture of hackerdom influences, especially as ESR is articulated in the jargon file, has influenced digital humanity?
I've been recently studying the work of Cuban architect and theorist designer named Ernesto Rosa, who speaks of technologies of disobedience, architectures of necessity. He spent 10 years in the 90s going around Cuba during the special period when the Soviet Union had already crumbled and the embargo was still in full effect, recording the way that people were transforming everyday objects to meet another need that they had. My favorite example is the washer dryers that came in from Russia in the 70s. The washers were very good, but the dryers sucked, and eventually they all broke down. What people would do is they would just saw them off and then take the motor fan out of it and turn them into house fans to keep people cold. And I recently interviewed him and asked him, so what makes the Cuban technology of disobedience different than the hackerdom that we see around the world? And he said, well, the difference is that in Cuba everybody does it. And the day that everybody does it in the rest of the world, then we have something like that. Well, I know a group of people that do it, and that's us, mostly the digital humanities folks. Most of the ones that I see around the world are actually operating outside of the large infrastructures, digital infrastructures that are being built within the humanities and sciences at universities, who spend tons of money on stuff other than academic research and pedagogy. So digital humanities folks grab their own servers, start wrapping up their own thing, figure out what they have with the tools available at hand. Not everybody gets the grants, actually, it's a small minority. So there we are, the people under the embargo, having lost the support of the Soviet Union.
One aspect of digital humanities, I think, is supposed to be critically engaging with technology. How do you guys frame that in terms of critically engaging with technology in the humanities?
Frame it by beginning with a particular technology. Technology is a bit of a weasel word, with no disrespect to weasels, but they're hard to catch. Specific instances of a technology. There are people like Langdon Winner who do very well with talking about technology as a global phenomenon. But I would begin with particular ones, with particular examples, and proceed from there.
So I'm very fond of, right now, this idea of media archaeology. It's in some ways a form of looking away, looking at the dead ends, because I think they allow you to understand. It's very hard sometimes to see the successful technologies and understand, think about them critically, because they are, in some ways, they've already formed some of your categories. So if you look at the unsuccessful ones and the dead ends, that can help you at distance, or even just doing, sort of trying to cross cultures, what Alex was describing, looking at how the same technologies get looked at and used in different cultures. So the media archaeology in particular, one of the projects that I've started working on is trying to go back through the history, identify moments that seem to have been important, and then try to rebuild them. Not slavishly rebuilding, but trying to actually understand the context in which the agenda of the people that were doing them and how they thought it worked by, in some cases, re-implementing them. So I think that's only one form of critical engagement. I think there are many others, but that's one that I've been embarking on.
I'm particularly interested in your comment at the beginning about advocacy being one key role for chances. And it's something that obviously people in the digital humanities get very involved in. And you will know better than I some places, even in some countries, digital humanities is seen as the future of the humanities. They sort of will save the humanities in the context of budget cuts and all the rest, and failure to appreciate the value of what the humanities brings. I'm not sure that's always such good news, and I just wonder if you have a sense of, if you like, a strategic direction we could be.
For us, advocacy almost always means advocacy to the government for funding, for whatever other things we can provide. Always means having a good story to tell. So the New South Wales Library, New South Wales State Library, has been engaged in a very large digitisation project because it could show to the people who have the purse strings what would be then available for the public if we were able to find the money to do this. And I think that kind of is reflected in almost every successful advocacy project. Something needs to come from it that you could show to the people in power and that they can actually appreciate and understand how that will contribute to the culture and to other things. Lately we've been taking everyone to Canberra to the War Memorial Museum, where they've been engaged in a very large project for World War I, which is enormously impressive and could not ever have been done without the digital part of the digital humanities. And slowly but surely, I think people are coming around. I mean, the amount of money being granted to the New South Wales Library is huge. And so it will work, but you've got to have a good story, and that's the basis for all advocacy.
More on that briefly. One former Minister of Education in the UK, David Willis, was asked on the BBC about his funding decision, particularly favouring the sciences. And he said that when I came to make my decision, what I was presented with was a detailed report from representatives in the sciences, which laid out exactly what they proposed to do and what would come from it. He said, and I received nothing from the humanities.
There's a tension here that I've seen. I see it here in this conversation between support for projects and building large infrastructure for projects, or support for people, faculty, librarians, support for the institutions.
Continuing programs.
Continuing programs rather than projects. One of the things that is happening in digital humanities is that there's a takeover, sort of an almost traditional Marxist takeover of the means of production of knowledge. Publishing industry, analog, you depend on that machinery in order to get your work out there, for them to distribute it and all these things. I don't depend on anyone to get my work out there. I really can really, I have the tools available. They're right at hand. I can get it out. And I see this is happening everywhere. The hackerdom is actually taking over slowly the production and dissemination of knowledge. This is in tension with this kind of money for large infrastructure. Now, of course, we want both. But it scares me that sometimes when we focus on the advocacy, we think of projects, of large national projects, rather than programs, continuing to fight for higher education at the level of long-term employment.
Alex, I don't think I would want to take you along with me.
No. You go get that money.
But actually, I think that's exactly what some of our consultations around development of research, infrastructure, strategy for the humanities has very much been around the large-scale stuff we need in the digitisation, but don't forget so much of what's needed is at the individual researcher level or the program level, and that's certainly going to be something that we need to look at, because it also, one other thing I just wanted to talk about was the evaluation frameworks for these sorts of projects as well. I mean, that's really critical in Australia when the humanities are totally reliant, almost totally reliant on funding through the Australian Research Council. The types of evaluable frameworks are going to be really critical as well.
As an individual scholar, the question I ask myself is, what can I do with what I have? Without asking for anything more. And I do it. Because asking for anything more takes so much time that I'm not doing what I want to do.
And the other thing I'd add is, we talk about evaluation. We actually, as humanists generally, have the best capacity to talk more subtly about value. If we don't lead those discussions, then the sort of dumb version of political activity will occur where you present the politician with something shiny and new to open, and fund that, and then it will fall into decay in 5 years' time when it's no longer new, etc. I think that was implicit in your question, wasn't it? That we need stronger platforms for arguing for the value of humanities work, which includes now transformative capacity.
I might just add that, sorry, Paul, in the Australian context, research funding is so important because we have a very high level of casualisation in the humanities. Early career researchers are having to rely to pull in ARC grants to even get a position in a university. So while some people can certainly fund what they want to do, if they've got tenure, for early career researchers it's a very difficult road.
That's one of the main dangers of the project-based approach to fundraising, that you actually stand to hire more contingent labor, both within the libraries, postdocs, and these kind of things. So very careful.
Thank you very much to the panel. I'd like for us all to join together and thank them. And then we can have a break.
Welcome to this session. I'm Harold Short. I'm from King's College London and the University of Western Sydney. And it's a great pleasure to see you all, and a warm welcome to all our panelists. The theme of this conference is Global Digital Humanities, and the theme of this panel session is intersection between the humanities and the digital humanities. And so we've attempted to be as global as we can, and we have people from several different continents who will be talking to us. Very briefly, they each have 5 minutes to tell us something about the contribution that digital humanities can make to the humanities, either in their country or region or more globally. And so it gives me great pleasure to, first of all, introduce and welcome Professor Masahiro Shimoda from the University of Tokyo in Japan. He is the president of the Japanese Association for Digital Humanities and a very distinguished international Buddhist scholar. Professor Shimoda.
Okay, thank you for your introduction. My answer to this very important question, I put in a phrase, is that providing research and educational environments with digitally enhanced technologies, specifically designated for the needs of arts and humanities scholars. This attempt is brilliantly turned methodological comments by William Tully and Harold Shaw. However, to bring this attempt into realization is not so much easy as we may imagine. And the situation in actuality in Japan, and seemingly in other countries as well, has not been so much changed for the better, as we may assume from the rapid development and animated appearance of digital humanities. The discrepancy between expanding activities of digital humanities and widespread delayed reactions by traditional scholars has not been brought into solution. To digital humanities scholars mainly concerns the issue of an interpretation of a text or of a piece of an art, a profound human activity that constitutes the core of the humanities studies. On the one hand, quite a number of traditional humanities scholars are not aware of the fact that an interpretation of the content of a text or that of a piece of an art is essentially related to the inner structure of the text or piece of an art in which the content is embedded. Consequently, they do not pay attention to the fact that the discourse produced as a result of the act of interpretation of the object is to some or larger extent formulated by the implicitly given structure. On the other hand, science of informatics and digital technologies as the fruit of this science could make a substantial commitment to acknowledge if and only if the inner structure of a text or a piece of an art should be made manifested. In addition, and more importantly, the revelation of the structure of an object is dependent on the act of interpretation of the object as a human activity. There is an interdependency between these two activities, or more precisely put, these two activities are two sides of the same coin. The role of mediating these two activities can ideally be played by digital humanities scholars who are aware of the difficulty in applying rapidly developing digital technologies to the activities of interpretation implicitly carried out by humanities scholars. At the specific aim of bridging the discrepancy in communication between digital humanities and traditional art and humanities, the question given today, namely, what is the most important contribution digital humanities can make in supporting arts and humanities scholarship, should better be followed by the phrase more deeply, not necessarily more broadly. Of course, these two expressions are not mutually exclusive, since a broadness able to accommodate diversities therein needs the deepness in structure. However, seen from the practical perspective, the two approaches, broadly and deeply, are not so easy to exist together as the theory goes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Masahiro, for that very instructive contribution. Our next speaker is very pleased to welcome, I think possibly our first visitor to our conferences from, at least in this particular row, from South Korea. And so I'm pleased to introduce Hyung-Kwon Lee from Chungnam National University. And when we get to the question times, he'll be supported by colleague Kyung-Suk Soo. The really great news from a digital humanities point of view is that just in the last week, a national Korean Association for Digital Humanities has been formed, and University is part of that development.
Thank you. I'm Hyung-Kwon Lee from Korea. I can speak English only. I'm sorry. I will introduce an academic discipline called Humanities contents, originally from South Korea in 2002, and I will talk about its educational meaning through Chungnam National University project. The Globalism Humanity Contents project, which has been funded by the South Korea government since 2014. The current South Korea government has shown a strong interest in the field, in the culture field, since it started in 2013 and launched new policies to encourage them. The Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism policies. Tourism, which is in charge of culture policy, anticipated the in-market share of cultural-related industry, about $12 billion US. The goal of ministry for this year is to encourage the cultural industry of South Korea in order to export $10 billion US worth of cultural product, 800,000 jobs. The Korean government pushed this policy further by asking colleges and universities to adopt the vision of government head to reorganize their chair department and their curricula. This humanities content is a new word, originally coined in South Korea in 2001, when the Humanities Content Association was founded. The term was created because humanities scholar sought the terms cultural content, which had been widely used in South Korea, connotated overly commercialized culture and entertainment element, and they felt it needed to be changed. The reason that Korean universities are more interested in practical studies in humanities. First, the way of production, calculation, and the consumption of cultural products have changed as digital technology has developed rapidly. Cultural products such as music, movies, and games become easily accessible economic commodities that can be changed into currency. For example, the online game industry has been booming in South Korea. In fact, South Korea has several TV channels which only broadcasting online games being played by professional gamers, including online tournament. Second, South Korea popular culture has gained popularity abroad, including Southeast Asia, since the 1990s. Korean TV dramas, K-pops, even Korean food have become popular in Vietnam, Taiwan, Thailand, and as well as Japan and China. The field of humanities has faced the crisis in South Korea. It has been regarded as a field that has nothing to do with obtaining employment. Humanities studies in South Korea have been expanded for last decade without considering the social demands and practical availability. Human content studies has emerged as a counter argument that the humanities studies can be available as asset for the economic development as well as obtaining greater knowledge about the lives of people past and present. The humanity content project is part of college regarding the organization project that the Korean government initiated last year. South Korea faced an extremely low birth rate, which is the lowest in OECD countries in 2015, and the fast aging program. As a result, school-age children have rapidly decreased. However, the number of high school students who go to college has increased. 80% of high school graduate their college, enter college. Since the 1980s, the legal regulation to found a college have been eased, and many colleges were created. Perhaps high school graduates will outnumber quarter for the college admission in South Korea soon. Thus the Ministry of Education has pushed college hard to reduce the number of freshmen and reorganize their department by focusing on the specialized field that each college is best in. CNU participated in this policy and started in CNU Globalism Humanities Content Project in order to focus on practical science of humanities. CNU started this project in July last year. Well received $250,000 US from the government annually for 5 years. This project has 600 students and 33 faculty members participating in it, including for department, Korean language and literature, philosophy, archaeology, and industrial design. Our project team mainly focused on the Chungcheong area, which used to be capital city of the Baekje Kingdom from BC 18 to AD 660, and a city from which Japan adopted Buddhism. We teach students interdisciplinary studies on Chungcheong area through the lens of Korean language and literature, philosophy and history, and encourage them to find the practice aspect through studying the historical and literary aspect of the Baekje Kingdom. In South Korea, digital humanities is still young, but I think because of the similarities between DH and humanities content studies, which is content-based research and teaching, and more importantly, because of the DH inclusiveness of key factors of humanities. It will be more than welcome in South Korea and to the development of humanity studies. South Korea is rapidly changing in so many areas. I believe DH's property reflect this change in South Korea and will lead to new meaningful change in Korea, changing and society alike. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Sam from National Taiwan University, taking part in our digital humanities events for a long time now. He's both a computer scientist and a humanities scholar, and has done a lot of work with cultural institutions. So he's very well placed to speak to our topic.
What's the most important contribution digital humanities can make in supporting arts and humanities scholarship more broadly in your region or globally? Okay, so I highlighted the keywords, but I can only talk about a important thing because there are too many of them. Okay, so I decided that to support this regional spirit. I'll talk about something that I think is very, very important. As you may know, there has been a lot of animosity or say misunderstanding in East Asia, mainly for historical reasons. But actually, there are also a lot of commonality among us. One of the most important is that in East Asia, there's the Chinese written language, okay, which has been sort of stable for about 2,500 years. Okay. Of course, Japan and Korea and Vietnam have created their own written language, but for a very long time, they all used Chinese as at least one form of how they communicate. So consequently, a lot of historical events, or say philosophical thoughts, were captured in the same language, okay, but of course interpreted differently. I think now with DH, we finally have reached the point where all these angles of things can be merged together through digital means. I think that's really very, very exciting. Okay, it's not only for scholarly work, but also for the regional piece. The important contribution I think DH can do in terms of scholarship is to build digital research platforms for integrated East Asian studies, which enables the scholars to study things from their own desk, different views of things. So I'll give you some examples. The first one is something called 实录, veritable records, which are really chronological records that are kept by emperors. For example, in China, there are two complete sets, one from the Ming Dynasty, one from the Qing Dynasty. But what's really interesting is that there's another set kept in Korea that almost coincide completely in terms of time. Okay, they look at what's happening in that region from very different point of view, and I studied just a tiny bit, and I found them really exciting. Here's what you can do: you can really read them in parallel. Okay, you can have them cross-referencing each other and so on and so forth. I think there's a lot of research that can be done. Another one is the critical edition of classics. Okay, imagine Confucian in the modern age. If we can collect all these different interpretations from different era, from different countries, and put them together in a critical edition, that will be really exciting. They can be studied simultaneously. Another thing which I think is also really exciting is the travelogues of Korean intellectuals in China. More than 600 years, there were travelers who went to China from Korea and kept their journals. Okay, recently there was many of them were published. Okay, 500 volumes, because over the years there were more than 500 visitors, and so you can imagine how exciting these things can be. Okay, because I don't think there are similar things in the West, because they really look at China from a very different point of view from the local Chinese people. Another thing I'm sure many people know better than I do, Tripitaka, that's the Buddhist canons. Okay, we have some very important scholars here in this area, so I will not talk about. But as you know, a lot of them have been transcribed and annotated already. Okay, it will be very interesting to see what other things we can do on top of what has been done already. Finally, there's something that's sort of close to my heart. There's a type of reference books called 类书. Okay, it has a knowledge structure and quotations from different books. Now, once again, there's no similar things in the West. These things show an evolution of worldview through the ages and different regions. There is one called 士林广记, extensive record of daily affairs, which originated in China in the 14th century, but eventually it landed in Japan. Okay, which modified it very significantly. Very interesting to see how these books evolve, because they really reflect the local thoughts of things.
And our next speaker, I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Adi Delay from Northwest University in Potchefstroom in South Africa, a literary scholar, but also the director of Digital Humanities Developments at Northwestern University, and also very involved in the recent developments to form an association of digital humanities in South Africa.
Good afternoon, thank you very much. In the first instance, I shouldn't be here. The person who's been leading the work in South Africa the last 2 years is a man called Justice Rue, and this has been part of perhaps 20 years of his work, and I'll report on that briefly. I come from university, 120 kilometers southwest of Johannesburg. We used to be the University of Potchefstroom University for Christian Higher Education. Now we are a multiple campus university called the Northwest University. I work in the research unit Languages and Literature in the South African context. I'd just like to tell you about our unit, what we have done and where we're going the road ahead, and hopefully you'll get some answers for that. It's too early for me to say what DH can do in South Africa. We're just starting out. So in the first instance, in our unit, we have 4 programs: literature, descriptive linguistics, applied linguistics, and language technology. And that is run by the Center for Text Technology called C-Text. This group has been involved in HLT work for the last 10 years. And we hope that in developing DH further, we can have a shared kind of HLT-DH methodology in our unit. C-Text is a research and development center. They are internationally recognized and renowned for resource-scarce languages, especially for the 10 South African languages and for 4 African languages. They've, over the last 10 years, developed 21 end-user products, 200 core technologies, and 200 data sets and corpora. That's their publication record, and they've been able to attract some funding to the extent of 64 million rand for contract work for the state developing machine translation tools and so forth, and also spelling checkers. We also have the Resource Management Agency, which was set up a language resource agency by the Department of Arts and Culture, and we're running that at C-Text. Now, all of this background helps us to explain what led to the DH movement, if I may call it that. Justice Roux started this, and in 2013 and 2014, we used it at our university for a workshop with Dr. van Houten. We had training at various of these summer schools, and then very significantly, we had the first workshop on digital humanities in February this year, and the aim was primarily to inform scholars across the country who are working in DH pockets, perhaps doing DH work but not calling it that, perhaps to get a communal kind of basis for work on that. And also we had training done, hands-on experience, and people, Harold was there, Ray Siemens, Jan Rubitsky, and so forth, and David Gibbon. We hope, and from that flowed a steering committee. We're hoping to form the first Southern African committee, and that'll include Zimbabwe, Namibia, Botswana, Malawi, and Mozambique, I think. And what has happened so far, the committee has prepared the basic work. They've done a draft constitution, and we're hoping that for next year to have a second workshop where we will have constitution ratified, the organization constituted, and then prepare for application to join the larger group of associations. The road ahead, basically we were dealing with infrastructure. We're trying to combine our own groups, our 4 linguistic programs, and then extend that out into our faculty. Secondly, what we're also trying to do is establishing networks, intercampus, the National Association, and particularly also with the international community. And I would like to extend an invitation to everybody to have, to follow. I'll give you the website at the end, but to perhaps join us next year. We'll send out a call for papers. So we'd like to be part of this big group. And then we are hoping to work on further skills development in South Africa. And hopefully in the long run, we hope to be at the position where we can develop a center. What has also happened is that very recently, at the end of last year, the Department of Science and Technology in South Africa, we requested Justice Roux as champion of HLT in South Africa to submit a proposal. And for the first time, a humanities national research unit was established alongside all the national research infrastructures like the nuclear reactor and that sort of thing. So for the first time, a humanities-based institution is funded by science and technology, which is already an interesting development. And now what we heard in May is that we have been awarded that, It will be called the National Centre for Digital Language Resources. Our university, our unit will be hosting it, and we will be working with a number of other universities, Pretoria, University of South Africa, Northwest and Morocco Institute of the CSIR. And in that sense, what we have done is lay the groundwork, I think, for further work. And also, I think also in terms of the languages we have developed, we've taken, I think, a great step through CTEX to position all 10 African languages in South Africa, apart from English, bringing them into the digital age, preparing machine translation tools for them, automatic translation systems, and also spelling checker. That is where we are at the moment. The centre will be funded, a startup funding of 60 million rand. In the next 18 months we will be doing that, and then we will be funded for the next 10 years with 6 million rand annum. And we're hoping that that basic infrastructure will help us to become a valuable partner in DH in Africa, in Southern Africa. Thank you.
I have 5 minutes to speak for around 2 billion people. I'm speaking on behalf of the South Asian Digital Humanities Network, which was set up at the end of last year. It's an attempt to bring together Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Tibet, under the rubric and looking at our work in the digital humanities. Thank you. Alex was kind enough to quote me earlier today. I spoke at a fabulous conference that was hosted by Susan Brown and her colleagues at Edmonton earlier this year, at which I said, your DH is not my DH. And I'm just going to quickly walk you through why I feel that that might be the case. So I felt like this might be a good object lesson in how to explain why this might be. The object on the left, on the top left, is called a kavad. It's a wooden storytelling box. Usually it's taken from village to village to illiterate audiences. And the storyteller, or the narrator, points to the pictures as he unfolds the box to tell them the stories of gods, goddesses, mythologies, etc. It is still widely used and is often one of the only sources in which oral tradition still exists in a living form in India today. The object on the right, some of you will recognize. I created this at a physical computing course at Digital Humanities Summer Institute earlier this week. I've lost count now. But anyway, and it's called the hashtag box. And basically what the hashtag box does is the heart lights up every time anyone tweets with the hashtag DHSI. And the reason why I felt like these two objects spoke to each other, that in my mind, they're both containers for information. But the way that we think about information in our different cultural contexts is quite different. And I think that there is a danger that the ways that we think about information is kind of largely hegemonically determined by what has been received from the Anglo-American and continental academies, especially so in India and in parts of South Asia, due to our colonial existences. I felt like the next kind of possible step on from physical computing and making and DIY culture is what we call our own homegrown DIY culture, which is jugaad, a term with which some of you might be familiar, which is an indigenous, elegant response to lack of resources by using, undermining, hacking existing resources. So this is one of my favorites. This is somebody making an espresso machine, a cappuccino machine. So there's coffee in the pressure cooker, and he's on a bicycle, and when he cycles, it creates froth in the little bowl, and thus you have your frothy cappuccino. It just goes to show that there are already indigenous ways in which we in South Asia think about making and creating, and how it's often already thought of as an intellectual response to our existences. So I just wanted to also walk you through the kind of work that's being done in South Asia and the challenges that we face. So we speak among 780 languages, 220 of which have been lost in the last 50 years, and there is some excellent work being done, especially by the folks at Wikipedia, at trying to chronicle and record these languages by going out there into the field and recording people speaking these languages. They obviously cannot be recorded in letters in any way or form, but this just goes to show the challenge that we're dealing with when it comes to linguistic diversity. What this also means is that none of the tools that we have so far that have been implemented by academics elsewhere really work for us when it comes to transcribing, creating digital and literary resources. So this resource, Bichitra, which was created by the School of Cultural Texts and Records at Jadavpur University in Calcutta, is the first of its kind. It's an attempt to create a homegrown TEI schema for Bengali, but there are no such equivalents in any other Indian languages as yet. We struggle a lot with OCR. A lot of OCR doesn't pick up or correctly render Indian languages or Indic languages, which is a huge problem that we are grappling with at the moment. We also do not have the advantages of robust records in terms of heritage or historical records. So this is a wonderful project that's come out of Presidency University in Calcutta, which is working with the Dutch on chronicling and recording the tombstones and the cemeteries that accommodate Dutch sailors, etc., who came over to India. But we don't have, like many cemeteries, we don't have any kind of maps. A lot of GIS work, for example, relies on things like fire maps, insurance maps. We don't have any of these, so we have to kind of go straight to the ground level and build up from within. We also have, despite being a democracy, we have, at least in India and elsewhere in South Asia, considerable problems with policy and cybersecurity and access, and the Center for Internet and Society in Bangalore is doing excellent work on trying to make our online lives more free. There have been some recent high-profile cases about people being jailed for critiquing the Indian government on Facebook. If you tweet this, I might get arrested. So there are considerable problems doing digital work in India and elsewhere in South Asia. I'm speaking more about India because that's the world that I know the best. And sadly, we do not, for obvious reasons, have that much collaboration with our Pakistani colleagues, which we would dearly like to have. We also have the unwelcome corporate intervention of Facebook, etc., who are attempting to make the internet Facebook. And so internet.org, which allows free access to free Facebook plus a couple of other sites, has been strongly advocated by the Indian government, but there is quite a lot of resistance against it, thankfully, for the scope of our digital work. Also in terms of mapping, and there's currently a geomapping workshop going on now, the open street mapping community in India is very strong and are doing excellent work, and is a very welcome intervention in a country where we cannot actually reproduce maps. We can't publish maps without the permission of the National Survey of India. And so it goes to show the impact that GIS and training in GIS could have on the way we look at history and politics in our region. There is a great and increasing attempt to keep our audiovisual heritage alive. This is the Traveling Archive, which is an archive showcasing Bengali folk music. Again, a form of music that does not have any form of consistent notation. And elsewhere, I'm attached to a Center for Public History at my institution, and the internet has been used for some wonderful oral history work and public history work. This is the oral history project that's come out of Pakistan, which recognizes the histories of people that are not traditionally told in institutional and academic histories. Her Stories, which comes out of Sri Lanka, which is a resource that wonderfully chronicles the histories of motherhood in both North and South Sri Lanka. We also have considerable problems with preservation and conservation in countries where climate is not helpful in kind of preserving books and papers. We've been kind of trying very hard to preserve them the best we can, but as I said, OCR is a problem. And to that end, several institutions have actually been coming up with their own versions of Unicode. So this is the Madan Purishkar Pustakalaya, which is in Nepal, in Patan. And they have been doing immense work in conserving and preserving their cultural heritage, and actually have made available different keyboard layouts to key in texts that are prevalent in the Nepali language. I would also like to put in a quick note for supporting their drive to raise money for the archives after the horrific earthquake that struck on 25th of April. I was in the building, and I'm only glad that they have managed to digitize as much as they have, because the building is collapsed. So what I would say is that in terms of what digital humanities can offer to South Asia as a region is in a way quite profound and important, in that it is actually a way that it is improving and intervening our lives as human beings in the region. And I think it's very rare that as academics we have the privilege and are in the position to make an impact both inside and outside the academy, and that's why I'm really hoping that DH will gather momentum and and go forward in South Asia. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Padmini. And the last session, the last part of the session, is Neil and Kay, who are going to be talking to us about CenterNet.
Kay and I got to split 5 minutes, which gives me 2.5 minutes. And I thought that rather than use the full 2.5 minutes, I want to address the larger question of the session, but maybe through the eyes of what a DH Center can contribute, by making you realize that there's no art without constraint. And so I'm going to talk about how DH Centers can build capacities for humanities research through. And every other phrase is going to start with new, okay? So that is my challenge to myself, and I think it reflects back on a lot of what we've all heard. So, building capacity for humanities research through new data sets, new methods, new tools, new knowledge networks, new forms of cultural preservation, and new opportunities for engaging the public over the game.
Well, I don't think that was 2.5 minutes. What I'd like to say, first of all, is that I really enjoyed listening to the comments of the panelists. I think maybe, I assume most of you know what CenterNet is, but I'll just tell you briefly that CenterNet is an international network of digital humanities centers. We believe that there are somewhere in the neighborhood of about 150 centers in the world, and that number keeps growing as interest in digital humanities has continued to develop. In 2007, John Unsworth wrote a paper that was about digital humanities centers as cyber infrastructure for the humanities, for digital humanities. And that really resonated for me. I think that there are a lot of people out there doing digital work who may not understand the standards or best practices. They may not have access to servers. They may not have perhaps technologists to work with them to see that the work that they're doing is going to be sustainable over time. To get back to the question, what is the most important contribution digital humanities can make in support of the humanities? I think we've come up with a lot of different ways in which digital humanities really does support the humanities. And I thought I'd mention a couple of things that I found in directing the center myself and working with many humanists who either are very interested in it and don't know a lot about it, or are just starting to kind of dip their toes into it. What I would say is that among the things that digital humanities can do is it can help us reveal new questions about the humanities. And let me give you an example. One of the projects that we work on is called the Walt Whitman Archive. And a few years ago, we started putting up Leaves of Grass, which was one of Whitman's most famous poems, in translation. And then after we put up the translations into various languages, we had those retranslated into English. And what is really interesting about it is the interpretations that different people put upon the poetry of Walt Whitman. And I think that that could not have been done very easily in a print format. One of the things we found, for example, was a Spanish translation by a man named Vasseur. And one of the things that came out in it as it was retranslated is that all the way through Leaves of Grass, he interpreted it in very personal ways. And so suddenly his grandmother showed up in Leaves of Grass. So I think that that's something that helps reveal the humanities through digital humanities.
Okay, we've got a few minutes for some discussion.
So, my question is, for bringing digital humanities to the humanities, how do you deal with the adoption problem? Insofar as some of my colleagues in archaeology literally have dust coming off their shoulders and don't want to deal with computers at all. So how do you convince people to adopt?
Well, it's kind of the 80-20 rule, in a way. I think that there are some people who are easily going to adopt it. They have been using computers to do reading, to do research, to do basically study already. That doesn't mean everybody is going to. So, you take advantage of opportunities as they arise to help help people move forward.
I have never found digital evangelism to be effective. Going to people and saying, oh, these are all the things you can do. What I have found effective is to give people data sets that interest them, that they want to work on, and then help them figure out what tools and methods they can use to pursue the research that they want to pursue anyway. And I'm not interested personally in turning people into new digital humanists. I'm interested in methodologies, tools, and data, how they can come together to make the humanities more complex, more compelling, and more engaged with the world.
I think we're at a really interesting moment in India at the moment when it comes to the humanities as a concept, because what we inherited is what we're trying to push against and come up with our own homegrown version of what the humanities might be. And as a consequence, both because of linguistic variation and conceptual categories, we're coming up with a whole other taxonomy, a whole other vocabulary that can be used to re-infuse digital in a way that hasn't happened before. So I think for us, it's kind of, it's no longer really a question of making somebody a digital humanist or etc. I think if you are now entering what we're calling the new humanities, for want of a better phrase, then digital is part and parcel of that because it's kind of as influential in the formation of the new digital technologies in South Asia then.
I have been building large digital libraries for a number of years. And then I found it very disturbing because I think I built wonderful systems, wonderful tools, wonderful content that people really should bang on my door too. I actually started to realize about two years ago that I was really using the wrong approach, in the sense that I was building these wonderful data sets that I think people obviously would use them, without realizing that people have their own research problems. And so if they have their own research problems, they use their own data. So why would they abandon what they're doing and come to you? So our approach at the moment, which is actually what had been done in the West for many years already, is really trying to figure out a way to engage in their research at their data building stage. Just to tell them that, look, you're gonna have to record these things, deal with them anyway. So So if you're going to do it, you might as well use something which can help you.
I personally, I have to confess that I'm very poor at handling the digital technology. So always my colleagues they help me to do that. And so that's as I said touched on the theme in my short presentation. The discrepancy between humanities and the digital humanities it seems to be great, but actually, as Neil so pertinently pointed out, in the stage of the actual activities of our study, we can sort of come together and cooperate together in a practical way. So the important thing is to know the real needs for others to realize. So that's why to make methodological commons in cooperation with humanities scholars or colleagues is very important. And if digital humanities scholars wish to put the emphasis of their contribution on the development, proper development of arts and humanities, they should devote some amount of efforts to the observation and analysis of the activities of their colleagues in selective ways with discerning eyes.
I would like to agree with my colleague, but I think for me what's very important is from our perspective, is the development of a dialogue between, as my colleague said, between humanities scholars, but also with let's call it the computer science people. And it seems to me that's one of the biggest challenges in our context, is to get where humanities scholars are not really working in teams, how to get to share language. To me, that is one of the most important aspects to do.
I'd like to get some comments on the notion that digital humanities supports research rather than is research.
I'm confused by the underlying assumption, whether that's there, so maybe you could tease that out. Is working in innovating tools and methods not a form of research, and is that not a form of digital humanities?
It all depends on how you practice that. What the question is all about is the very sensitive word supports and the effect this has on people's careers who are labeled as supporting the research of others.
Now I see
themselves
exactly.
do not initiate problems, but depend on problems raised by others, and therefore have no intellectual freedom.
Now I understand where you're coming from, and I couldn't agree with you more. That it's a problem to formulate that question in terms of DH is only what supports, like the real work of the humanities that happens elsewhere.
Elsewhere by other means.
By other means.
You press the button, out come the answers, you trundle over back to your own area, and you work out concepts.
Yeah, and that kind of assumption has a very complicated history with digital humanities centers, some of which have grown up under the aegis of like support and service rather than research.
I think that's a wonderful question. I'm a computer scientist by training, okay, and I have produced two, I think, very good PhD students in computer science, but they couldn't find jobs in Taiwan. So they went to Europe and were being loved by the sinologists there because they know the contents, they know the technology, and it sentence okay, because in some sense, I think what I'm doing now it's not research in computer science, it's not research in humanities, it's called the research service industry. I think DH is an evolving field. I mean, when I look at computer science,
20 years ago, there was no computer science departments. It's mainly two groups of people, one from electrical engineering, one from mathematics, and they just hate each other. So over the years, they gradually reached a common ground and developed a very important discipline. Okay, of course, digital humanities is different because it covers a whole spectrum of disciplines in the humanities. But as an evolving field, I'm not so pessimistic. I think eventually, probably 20, 30 years, it will become a field. I think it will probably be very different from any of the humanities fields that we have now. And it's certainly very different from a computer science from a strict technological sense. Okay, I don't know what it is, and I don't know whether I'll live long enough to see it. But just being able to participate in it sort of excites me.
In my understanding, no knowledge is autonomous of themselves. So to support or to develop, this is just a matter of language. So yeah, the important thing is what is our activity in research or in education. This is, we are just within our network of the past, the present, and future.
I guess my response to this question is that in what I heard from the panelists, it was all about, well, there's some about administrative aspects of what we do, but everything else was about research and collaboration. So thank you all very much for coming to this session, and please join me in saying a big thank you to our panelists.